The air was heavy with summer heat when Janelle Monroe received the call that would shatter the last thread of denial she'd been holding on to. It was June 11th, 2012, and the nurse's voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, as she delivered the results. Positive. Gonorrhea. The word echoed in her ears, but it wasn't just the diagnosis that broke her, it was what it meant. It meant that her husband, the man she trusted, the father of her child, had been with someone else. And now, she was carrying the physical proof of his betrayal in her own body. Janelle traveled down memory lane. She remembered August 29th, 2011. Before that day, she had already cried herself to sleep more nights than she could count. Their apartment in Decatur, once filled with laughter, gospel music, and the smell of buttered biscuits on Saturday mornings, now felt like a quiet battleground. That Monday afternoon, she sat beside her husband inside a small counseling room at New Dawn Christian Fellowship. The air conditioning hummed above them, but the tension between them made the room feel heavy. Janelle didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply said she felt emotionally abandoned, as if the man who once wrote her love notes and prayed with her every night had slowly faded into someone else. Deshaun nodded inside. He told the pastor that things had been stressful. The church was growing. His ments needed him. "It's not about her," he said. "It's just life." He spoke with that same calm confidence that made him beloved in their community, but Janelle noticed something in his eyes, distance, like he wasn't really present in the room with her. Like her pain didn't land. Weeks later, on October 14th, Janelle slid into Deshaun's car after her shift at the school, reaching for her phone charger beneath the passenger seat, and her fingers touched something smooth and unfamiliar. She pulled it out, a gold hoop earring. Not hers. Not anything she recognized. She froze. Her heart raced in a way that was too familiar. Childhood flashbacks of her mother finding unfamiliar lipstick on her father's collar came rushing back. She waited until they got home to ask. Calmly. Deshaun blinked, chuckled nervously, and said it probably belonged to one of his ments, maybe from when he dropped someone off after youth night. Janelle nodded. She even smiled. She told herself to believe him, because to do otherwise meant admitting what she was starting to suspect deep down. That something sacred between them had already begun to rot. It wasn't until December 1st, 2011, that her quiet suspicions began to take root in her body. That Thursday afternoon, her cousin Keisha called from Lenox Square Mall. She sounded shaken. "Cousin," she said, "I just saw Deshaun. He was holding hands with some light-skinned girl with a tattoo behind her ear." Janelle didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stared at the stove in her kitchen for almost an hour. That evening, she made an appointment with her gynecologist, not because she felt sick, but because she needed to rule out what her heart already feared. 6 months passed before everything broke wide open. On June 11th, 2012, the nurse called during her lunch break. The school was quiet. Summer sessions had ended, and she had just returned from grading final projects. She answered the phone thinking it was about a PDA meeting. Instead, it was her results. Positive for gonorrhea. Her stomach sank. The nurse said a lot of things after that, talked about treatment options, confidentiality, follow-ups, but Janelle didn't hear much of it. She was staring at the framed photo of her and Deshaun on her desk. Church picnic, arms around each other, sunlight catching the cross on her necklace. She hung up, walked to the faculty bathroom, looked at herself in the mirror, and whispered, "You gave me this." Between June 12th and June 27th, she started keeping a journal. It wasn't dramatic. Just facts. Cold, quiet facts. The time he left. The number of times his phone buzzed at night. Who he called. When he laughed. When he didn't touch her at all. She saved screenshots, texts with names like Baby G and Mia Moore. Small things he'd forget to delete when he fell asleep early. But still, she never mentioned the STD. Not once. Not in anger, not in pain. She needed him to admit it. She needed him to look her in the eyes and tell her the truth. He never did. On July 2nd, 2012, Deshaun stood in the hallway, freshly shaved and dressed in his mentoring group's branded polo. Janelle was folding laundry on the couch when he said he needed space. "Just like that. This marriage," he mumbled. "It's starting to feel suffocating." Janelle looked up. "Is there someone else?" she asked, her voice low. He smiled, almost like it was funny, and said no. That night, Janelle didn't cry. She just printed every document, copied every message, and placed them in a Ziploc folder. It felt like protecting herself from an invisible fire. Then came July 7th, 2012. Janelle walked into a small salon in East Point under a fake name, sat down in a worn-out stylist chair, and asked the woman standing behind her for a trim. The stylist, Maya Thomas, was cheerful, chatting about music and weekend plans. She had no idea who Janelle was. Janelle studied her face in the mirror while Maya worked. The tattoo behind her ear, the confidence, the perfume. She said thank you, left a generous tip, walked to her car, and vomited twice before driving home. On August 1st, she handed a manila envelope to her sister, Renee, and said only one thing: "Open this if I ever stop coming home." Renee asked what was going on. Janelle just smiled, tired, hollow, and said, "It's just in case." The envelope contained the test results, the messages, a photo of the earring, and a USB stick full of text backups. And on August 14th, 2012, Janelle sat across from her therapist, hands folded tightly in her lap, and said the words she hadn't said aloud yet. "I don't feel like a person anymore." She described how her skin felt foreign, how her own reflection looked like a stranger, how some nights she lay next to Deshawn and imagined herself sinking into the mattress, disappearing altogether. "I'm not just hurt," she whispered. "I feel infected, like I've been carrying someone else's lies inside me." That's when the therapist asked if she felt safe. Janelle paused for a long time and replied, "I feel like I'm standing still in a house that's on fire." By the time Monday, September 3rd, 2012 arrived, Janelle had already gone numb. For 3 days, she hadn't heard her husband's voice in person, just the occasional text that said, "I'm good," or Bible retreat going longer than expected. She didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't call, but she knew. Because sometime around 7 p.m. the night before, her cousin sent her a screenshot, a tagged Facebook photo showing Deshawn Monroe standing on the rooftop of a Midtown Atlanta hotel. He had his arms slung casually around Maya Thomas, his lips close to her ear. 2 other friends stood beside them, holding drinks. Deshawn was laughing in the photo, laughing like a man with nothing to lose. The caption read, "Retreat who? Just vibes, just love." Janelle didn't cry when she saw it. She just stared at her phone for a long time, then locked the screen and set it face down on the kitchen counter. She walked to the bedroom, opened the nightstand drawer, and sat there staring at the .38 revolver he had given her for protection 2 years earlier when a neighbor's house got broken into. She had never used it, never loaded it. It was just supposed to be a precaution, a symbol of safety. Now it felt like the only thing in the house that made sense. He walked in at 9:28 p.m., smelling like expensive hotel soap. Not the kind they kept at home. His face looked relaxed, his skin sun-kissed from 3 days of rooftop lounging, not scripture studies. He walked straight to the fridge and popped open a soda like it was any other night. Janelle sat on the edge of the couch, quiet. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the hallway lamp. She didn't ask how the retreat went. She didn't need to. But when she finally stood up and said his name, her voice cracked like something inside her had finally given out. He turned slowly, one eyebrow raised, already annoyed. That was the look he wore now whenever she questioned him, like her pain was a burden, like her silence was supposed to be enough proof of obedience. He told her he was tired. He said they could talk in the morning. That's when her voice rose, not in screams but in desperation. "Tell me the truth one time," she begged. Her voice broke. The words echoed off the walls. At 9:42 p.m., the neighbor in 2A heard something slam against the wall. Possibly a lamp or picture frame. Another neighbor in 3B reported hearing glass shatter. A child cried from down the hall. Someone turned up their television. Inside apartment 2B, the fight was no longer quiet. Janelle had finally taken the printed photo and held it up to his face. "This is your retreat?" she asked. Deshawn swatted the photo from her hand. It landed face down near the dining table. He didn't look afraid. He looked insulted. "You really dug that deep?" he muttered, shaking his head. "This is what you do now." She didn't yell. She only whispered, "You gave me a disease. You slept with her. Then you laid next to me." The words cut sharper than a scream. Deshawn didn't deny it. He didn't say yes either. He simply looked away, which was worse. Janelle could feel something rising in her chest, something she hadn't felt before. It wasn't rage. It was shame, betrayal, filth. It felt like being thrown into cold water and told to swim with bricks on your feet. At 9:56 p.m., a single shot rang out. The bullet struck Deshawn just below the chest. He staggered backward, gasping, one hand clutching the front of his shirt, the other reaching for the hallway wall. He didn't fall right away. He just looked at her, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like he was trying to speak but couldn't remember how. His legs buckled, and he collapsed near the baseboard, one arm outstretched. Janelle dropped the gun where she stood. She didn't move. She didn't scream. She just looked at his body, the soda still fizzing on the floor, the Facebook photo bent at the corner, the room now filled with the smell of gunpowder and something final. When officers arrived at 10:21 p.m., they found Janelle standing exactly where she had been 25 minutes earlier, barefoot, trembling, her right hand twitching slightly. The revolver was on the ground beside her. Her nightgown had a splash of blood near the hem. Her voice was quiet, nearly broken, when she looked at the responding officer and said, "I didn't plan this. He just wouldn't stop lying." And then she sat down on the floor beside the wall and wept. Not loudly. Not for show. Just soft, steady sobs, like someone who finally realized she had become the very ending she prayed to avoid. What made the case against Janelle Monroe even more complex and more tragic wasn't just what happened that night on September 3rd, 2012, but everything that had already been building silently in the background. During the investigation, detectives uncovered a string of text messages between Deshaun Monroe and Maya Thomas that dated back at least 5 months. The messages were not just flirty or harmless, they were deeply personal. They spoke in a language of escape, of fantasies about starting a life, without the pressure of being holy, as Deshaun once put it. On May 19th, he texted Maya, "I wish I could just take you to the Gulf and forget Atlanta ever happened." On June 4th, he sent a photo of himself shirtless in a hotel room mirror. She replied with a picture from her bathtub, surrounded by candles. They referred to each other as my peace and my hiding place. What was striking was the calmness in their exchanges, like they didn't feel guilty, just tired of hiding. One thread from July 28th read, "I can't wait until the day we don't have to whisper." That message was time-stamped at 1:37 a.m. Janelle was asleep in the next room. But what painted the deepest picture of what Janelle was going through weren't the messages between her husband and another woman. It was her own words. Her journal entries, submitted to the court during trial, became the emotional heartbeat of the case. The pages were written in blue pen, with small, neat handwriting. No dramatic scribbles. Just calm, exhausted pain. One entry dated June 13th, 2012, 2 days after she received her STD results, read, "My skin itches in places I never knew could hurt. It's not the disease, it's the shame. I feel like I'm carrying a secret infection not just in my body, but in my soul. He still smiles at me in the morning. He still prays at dinner. How do you stay married to someone who made you feel this unclean?" Another, written on July 3rd, just 1 day after Deshaun asked for space, said, "I stared at him while he tied his shoes this morning. All I wanted to ask was, did you love her while you were still loving me? But I didn't ask. I just packed Ayana's lunch and folded his socks. I feel like a maid in my own life." A third entry, on August 12th, just days before the shooting, included one haunting line. "If I disappear, I hope someone reads this and knows I tried." Her pain wasn't loud. It was slow, like water rising in a house until you couldn't breathe anymore. The medical records, obtained from a private women's clinic in downtown Atlanta, confirmed what Janelle already knew but never voiced aloud. She had tested positive for gonorrhea on June 11th, 2012. The nurse noted signs of stress and requested she return for counseling. The documents recommended she notify all recent sexual partners. But Janelle never told Deshaun. At least, not directly. The only notification came months later, in the form of confrontation. There was also the surveillance footage. Captured from a narrow security camera mounted just above Maya's salon in East Point, the footage showed Deshaun entering and exiting the premises a total of 11 times between April and August. Always after 7 p.m. Always alone. In one clip from June 20th, he arrived in a hoodie despite the warm weather, parked in the alley, and let himself in through the back door. He stayed inside for almost 3 hours. Maya's salon was closed to the public that day. The lights came back on at 10:44 p.m. But the most damning piece of evidence, both legally and emotionally, was the sealed envelope. Janelle had handed it to her older sister, Renee, on the evening of August 1st, 2012, as they drank tea on the back porch after Ayana's bedtime. She didn't cry. She didn't explain. She just placed the envelope in Renee's hands and said, "If anything ever happens to me, open this first." Inside were printed screenshots of the text messages, a USB drive with backups from Deshaun's phone that she had quietly synced to her laptop, a copy of her medical report, and a handwritten letter addressed to her daughter. The letter was short. It read, "Ayanna, if you ever read this, know that you were my light every single day. I didn't leave because of you. I stayed because of you. But staying hurt too." During trial, when the envelope was introduced into evidence, the courtroom went silent. Even the judge took a moment before allowing it to be read into record. It wasn't just evidence. It was a woman's quiet scream trapped in paper. Janelle had been preparing. Not to kill, but to survive. But survival in her world had already cost her too much. Her body, her dignity, her voice. And by the time the truth came crashing in, there was nowhere left to store the pain. And nothing left to protect her from what she would eventually become. By the time the calendar flipped to November 19th, 2013, nearly 15 months had passed since the shooting. But the weight of that single bullet still hovered over everything. Over the quiet courthouse hallways, over the pews of Deshawn's old church, and most heavily, over Fulton County Superior Courtroom 3C, where the state of Georgia versus Janelle Monroe officially began. That morning, Janelle sat at the defense table wearing a navy blue blouse and a simple black skirt. Her hair was pulled back tightly, no makeup, no jewelry. Just her hands folded in her lap and a tiredness around her eyes that no amount of sleep could fix. When she looked up at the jury, she didn't flinch. But she also didn't hold their gaze. The prosecution opened strong. District Attorney Renee Barksdale described the shooting as a premeditated act carried out by a woman scorned, who used silence to mask the calculation of her actions. They pointed to the revolver Janelle purchased in July 2012, just weeks before the incident, and the fact that she had never reported feeling unsafe before. To them, the evidence was clear. She found out about the affair, sat with it, and then chose to end it not with divorce, but with death. They showed the text messages, displayed on a large monitor in the courtroom. Janelle didn't look up when they read them aloud. They also introduced the surveillance footage of Deshawn entering Maya's salon. Then they played the audio from the 911 call made by a neighbor, capturing muffled shouting and the eventual gunshot. That sound echoed through the room like a second death. But it was the sealed envelope, the one she had given her sister weeks before the shooting, that nearly broke the room in half. The prosecutor said it proved intent. That Janelle had been building her case in silence, waiting for the moment to strike. They called her calculated, cold, capable of hiding the kind of anger that doesn't boil, it freezes. The defense told a different story. Attorney Roderick Blake, with his soft southern drawl, didn't argue that Janelle hadn't pulled the trigger. He argued why. He painted her as a woman who had endured betrayal not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically. He walked the jury through the STD diagnosis, her therapy sessions, her journal entries, and her refusal to scream for help until it was too late. He asked the jury to look at the brokenness of a woman who never saw herself as a killer, but saw herself fading. One of the most powerful moments came when a social worker read a letter Janelle had written from jail to her daughter, Ayanna. It said, "You may never understand this, baby, and I don't expect you to, but I hope you find love that feels like truth, not like silence." The courtroom was still when the jury left to deliberate. On December 12, 2013, after 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdict, guilty of voluntary manslaughter. Not murder. Not self-defense. Something in between. Something that tried to name the weight of a woman collapsing under years of betrayal. Janelle was sentenced to 14 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 7. She didn't cry when the sentence was read. She just nodded once, slowly, as if she had already made peace with whatever the outcome would be. Her sister Renee hugged her afterward. No words were exchanged. Just 2 long seconds of quiet grief between siblings who once braided each other's hair on school mornings and now stood on opposite sides of the prison visitation room. On December 20th, 2013, just 8 days after the verdict, Maya Thomas gave birth to a baby boy at a small clinic on the east side of Atlanta. When asked about the child's father, she refused to name him. She said only, "He'll know when he's old enough to ask." The press speculated, but no one confirmed anything. Deshawn's name wasn't on the birth certificate. Ayanna Monroe, now 10, was living with her aunt in Charlotte. When asked by a local reporter outside the courthouse if she wanted to say anything, she just shook her head. Later, in a written statement passed through her guardian, she said, "I used to believe in happily ever after. Now I just want peace. I don't care about fairy tales anymore." And so the story that began with wedding vows, baby laughter, and Sunday sermons ended in a courtroom, surrounded by silence, broken women, and a child who lost both her parents, one to the grave, the other to the system. But the truth is, the real loss happened long before the trigger was ever pulled. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss our jaw-dropping true crime updates. And if you think this was shocking, check out our next story where a wife kills her husband after he found her Facebook account password. Let us know what you think in the comments.